So if you have any questions, there should be some microphones the students can bring to you. So go ahead if you have any questions.
Hi, Pete Moser from Subaru. I've been in quality most of my career, and I hear both of the speakers talk about risk and severity in today's topic. My question is, in quality, we do something called a failure mode effects analysis. Is that also used in both insurance and industry and Procter & Gamble?
Let me start with that. As Sergio just said, this is what we do is really more fundamental than that. So the work that I do anyway doesn't entail that sort of technology or that sort of process, but it can be done. I mean, certainly anything that can be done, because quality is a huge issue, obviously, as you're talking about, and we really focus on the, like I said, on the frequency severity issues and try to talk about the supply chain from maybe a little bit higher level than what you're dealing with.
Well, I think that failure mode analysis is business as usual. It's the Murphy law. If something can go wrong, it will. And so normally we use it to increase process reliability, efficiency, and as you rightly say, ensuring that we do not have quality incidents. Here we are speaking of disasters, so it's kind of a level up versus failure mode analysis. The kind of thinking is the same though. I mean, what you do is what can go wrong, but not anymore at machine level. You see what can go wrong at macro level, and then how we are going to cope on it. And you know, one thing I always wonder on BCPs is, and I think Anand made a good example. I mean, is a private company trying to restore its own business, especially if it's not life-threatening products like, you know, coffee? Is it right that we take resources in that area in order to restore that versus doing other stuff? So at the end of the day, as a company, I mean, you really need to go back to the authorities and always check that whatever you're trying to do does not interfere with more life-saving operation. I know in the case, for example, I mentioned of Folgers, I mean, in fact, the authorities were super happy of what we were doing because we were taking care of the employees, so we were lessening the burden on them. And then we also show a bit of hope for the area because we were the first plant coming back online. So I remember President Bush arrived with the helicopter the day of their inauguration. So in the end, we did it in sync with the local authorities. And I perfectly remember the example of Walmart. Walmart at the time was very criticized, and they decided to go all the way in with their supply chain expertise in order to help out with basic supplies, water, duct tape, I remember at the time, and that was a great thing to do. So, but at the end of the day, when it's a system that fails, you really need to go, as you said, I mean, with the authority first, especially in the first days, you need to go to the center of command and say, I want to do this, am I allowed to do it?
So Sergio, you brought up one interesting thing in terms of the role of the private firm for its own stakeholders versus its role in sort of doing good, taking over where maybe the local authorities are not as quickly organized. So, you know, what is the norm? Is there sort of this decentralized authority and spend authority, or does it still require senior management to say, okay, I authorize X million? Or how is this actually sorted out so that you balance people sort of spending from the coffers to do good versus what the firm is about?
I mean, I can only talk of my own experience in P&G. So pragmatically, what we do in these cases, and I think that's what happened with Katrina. I mean, there was very poor communication at the time. So the only message that arrived from Cincinnati was spend whatever you need to make employees safe. And this is the message you always hear in P&G whenever there is a situation like that. Then there was the revolution in Egypt. I remember the whole travel agency of P&G was dedicated to get the employees back home. I was here in the US during 9/11. And again, the travel agency of P&G, their whole focus was get the Americans back home, get the Europeans and others staying in the US back home as well. No expenses spared, whatever is available and it's legal, you can do it. So really, at those moments, you don't get through authorization level and processes. I mean, as long as you can afterwards justify that you didn't take advantage of the situation, you take personal responsibility and just go along.
Of course, what does that mean for employee morale, right? I mean, they know that the corporation is taking care of them. It's a long-term situation. So that, again, goes back to the reputation issue and what happens with the morale of the workforce. And they know that they have an employer that's has a conscience.
Mm-hmm. Yes, there's a question.
Yeah, hi, Josh Merrill from Dogger Sciences. Ananth and Sergio, you both mentioned in situations where you take care of the employees first, empower them to make decisions locally. And that makes a lot of sense in a disaster situation, especially when communication may be broken outside of a disaster. But your normal day-to-day supply chain variability and risks, to what degree do those principles do you think still apply?
I would love that they would apply every day, but that's not the case.
Particularly around empowering employees in the local decision making. Can you speak to that?
So I think from the examples that we've looked at, I think the key is to see to it that for normal processes, that those decisions are aligned. So the most difficult thing you can have is have too many cooks in the kitchen. So at some point you need some sort of routines and alignment. If you have that, things can move very quickly. Look, I'm sitting here at Purdue. At Purdue, we do not have centralized authority. Okay, as a department head, I have 110 faculty. I don't have any authority. However, what I can do is convince people to work for the good of the cause, have processes, have speed of response, and trust that people have good judgment. Because there's a little balance. The more you make it permission-seeking, the less innovation you would have, because people are just punching the button. And we have a lot of smart people. So for us, the question is, how do you give people room to maneuver, but still have things aligned? And that's the question. And I can completely understand for corporations, there'll be a little more lockdown than we do. We're a little, we sort of encourage a little bit of anarchy in a university, because that's how, we have students, so they don't necessarily follow the rules, and neither do faculty. But the reason that's there is that we're a bit of a sandbox. When you come to the university, there's not that much you can break. You can mess up, you can do a whole bunch of things, and this is the place where you try out things. And if we lock this down completely, it's tough. So the balancing act is now, what I don't know, my sort of daughter was doing her internship at Google. So companies like that seem to have, if I ask her, what did you do? She said, I spent an hour making gourmet pasta from scratch. And I said, what has that got to do with your internship at Google? Well, it turns out that after they make that gourmet pasta and eat it, they sort of stayed through the wee hours of the night finishing off their projects. And so sometimes a little bit of flex on one side can buy tremendous commitment on the other side. That being said, look, I don't face the kind of organization that Gary and Sergio have to face, where they have to pay the bills associated with such a freewheeling culture.
In P&G now, especially for innovation and new projects, we are trying to apply this lean management concept that, to be honest with you, to me it's just a revamp, because the P&G I joined 20 years ago, that's what we were doing. And the whole idea there is that you have small teams co-located with a clear purpose, and in short cycles of time do wonders. I remember back in 2006, we were working on new manufacturing plant designed as modules that you could fit in a 20, 40-foot container. So you could build them anywhere in the world and then bring them on location and assemble in a couple of weeks, and then you had capacity on the ground to produce. At the time, we were working on all kinds of liquid detergents. While the team was co-located, it was not a local team. We took 6 months, put people from all over the world with different expertise in Cincinnati in a big lab, and we tried out everything. And the project was supposed to last 6 months. We did it in 4. And I ended up cooking pasta for everybody. Because we didn't have a facility, we were losing 2 hours for the lunch break. So I decided, okay, I'm going to cook for everybody. It's my team. The morale went very high. People were more engaged, and we closed the project 2 months earlier. So My advice, even a big corporation, is create a bubble of sanity around you and try to at least empower, with the power you have, the people around you to do the right thing and not having to ask permission at 300 layers all the time.
One thing to add to that, I think, is you learn by these processes. So when things go wrong, what do you learn about that process? Where should the authority be? What can we do better? So it's just a continuous improvement process of learning, and you try to employ those learnings in what you do in the future. So I think part of it is just you can't anticipate everything that's going wrong and every decision that has to be made. And so what do we learn from this? How do we reflect upon that? How do we change?
So one of the things that at least, historically when we taught project management, we taught it very much the way some of the older people in this room were taught, which is in some sense very linear, precedence-oriented, critical path, etc. Whereas when you think about agile strategies for software development, they're all focused on this idea of sprints, where there's a team, there's a goal, there's a lot of creativity, and you do a sprint. So this is bringing up the idea of sprints. Now, it is the case. So for us at Purdue, we have to do this constant balancing. We're a public university. We have to be responsible in spending, but we also need to be innovative. And so very often there are short groups, small groups that come together, are given very small time windows to come up with an idea. And you need the buy-in from enough people, but you also need sort of operating flexibility. Now, the way it operates is that at some point you've got to trust people to have good judgment. I mean, Sergio brought up this example that once the right team of people start assembling, they'll figure out good ways to solve problems. You don't need to have a system telling them all the things, because people are pulling things together. So I think it's a balancing act. And the trick here is to figure out how much flexibility makes sense and how do we keep things aligned. So it's a work in progress for us, by the way. Any other questions or comments?
If I can add one thing. One of the problems nowadays, I think, is we have too much data. And we are a public company, and we need to respond to shareholders. And now shareholders can really go and dig into the data and find out how P&G travel expenses are done and how much you spend on this. And it's a never-ending story. And that's why corporations are putting all these layers of controls, because fundamentally we are naked. I mean, everybody can see what we are doing. Now, at the end of the day, there is only one answer, and that is personal responsibility. And you need to face the fact that somebody will come and question what you do, and you need to respond and justify. I mean, if you're not ready to do that, then you should not have that freedom.
There's a question over here.
Yep.
So Jordan Lysing from Eli Lilly and Company, but building on your kind of comment on flexibility there, how do you see companies that have gone through either Katrina or other natural catastrophes build out maybe lesson learned systems that allow them to be more flexible? So either having a second Folgers line not in a natural disaster area, and then turning that to maybe companies that haven't gone through those lessons learned. How have you recognized or seen companies that are in more dangerous situations build out flexibility for those situations, et cetera?
Well, first of all, we did have a second line. We had one in Kansas City. So the point is that there was not enough capacity. I mean, the capacity was spread across the two. But one learning I remember was that at the time, we were making all our laundry liquid detergents in Lima, Ohio, the same place where the Glee series was out, by the way. And I found it funny when I was watching Glee. And the recommendation out of that was, we have too much of the company stake in one place. And if something happens in Lima, Ohio, we have no Tide liquid left for the US. So we decided to have a second location, and now we have a Tide liquid line in Alexandria on the other side of the country. So yes, I mean, you do get to those conclusions, and then you decide that, well, maybe I need to have spread my risk over more than one site. Even if economies of scale, sometimes they really push you on having only one location.
It's a balance.
Yeah. So I think one thing, purely from an academic perspective, there's a lot more focus on supply chain resilience now than ever before. And I mean, a lot of it is focused on, if you just focus on maximizing your expected performance, there'll be a risk associated with it. And earlier, nobody was really characterizing that risk and figuring out, how to balance that risk. Now, you mentioned flexibility before. Very often, and I think I recall many, many years ago when there was a project, and this was a question in the automotive industry. Do you spend money on a 150 machine transfer line, or do you buy a fully flexible CNC line that can produce anything? And over and over and over again, you could not justify the flexible line. And so if you just now the only way you could justify the flexible line is if the engineers who generated designs agreed that this design may be required to change dramatically. Okay? So the moment people accepted that they did not know everything about the future, all of these things became optimal. But think about anybody who proposes anything. Think about any capital proposal. Very rarely do they admit to you that they're actually quite clueless as to whether this will come to pass. So, and the reason is because the moment you expose this vulnerability regarding your forecast, you're doomed because somebody's going to take you apart, right? So sometimes some companies decided that before any capital project is approved, you have to have at least 2 different uses for that. And by putting that constraint, it's a little get out of jail card. Okay, so for example, this is happening in hospitals. Those of you who are thinking about robotic surgery, etc. The surgeons cannot justify the robots based on one use of surgery. They actually ends up. So this is an example with robotic surgery used for cardiac surgery. It turns out that the way you justify the Lombardi robot is for the high margin cardiac surgery, but also for obstetrics and gynecology. And these 2 groups, who historically never talk to each other, are now coming together to justify the use of the robot. So that is a hedge. And I think thinking along those lines is what, Now, sometimes if you don't allow this to happen, then you basically don't end up with the flexibility. Because as most people realize, the pure plays are more efficient, but the dinosaur was a pure play, and look what happened to that dinosaur.
When I was working on the project of the modular unit, we designed it so that you could do Tide Liquid, you could do Downy, you could do Dawn, you could do Mr. Clean, everything. And the point is that because of the modularity, it was way lower cost than previous capital units. So despite it was flexible, it was also cheap. Now, we at the time we were expanding in China, and I had to convince one of the brand teams that rather than installing their classic equipment that was fully dedicated to do their brand, they would be better off to use my modular system because it was cheaper, but also because of the risk involved that if the business would fail. Now, it's really terrible to go to tell people, you better buy my unit because if you go bankrupt, then somebody else can profit out of it, even if it is within the same company. Now, these people were listening in the end, and it was cheaper, so it did make economic sense, kind of, and it went south for them. I mean, their product never picked up in China, so it was converted to another business. That business went south as well. So it was converted to yet another business. And I said that was the best thing it could ever happen to this unit. We proved that the fact that it is flexible actually means that the capital was never lost. Now, we lost a lot of energy behind trying to build the Chinese market, and it's still a struggle for P&G for many years, but at least we didn't waste assets behind it.
Any other questions?
I have a question. Okay. This is Vibhav from second year MBA. Sergio, going back to your example where you proposed shifting the legal department from the basement to floor up, is there a cost-benefit analysis that is done? Because we are talking about disasters that may happen, maybe that may happen next year or may not happen for a decade. Because shifting an engineering team may disrupt your supply chain today, and you are doing something that may not happen for the decade. So is there a cost-benefit analysis to that?
I would say there is more an opportunity analysis. Okay, so in that case, they had to move because they had to move building. And at that moment, the decision of where to put their archive was a pretty soft decision that didn't impact the overall cost of the move. They just listened to my advice and decided to place the archive up, and that was it. So I agree with you. Probably if they had not planned the move, they would have never listened to me. And then I would have struggled to convince them, and probably they would have learned the hard way. When we decided to build a second plant for Tide Liquid, one of the reasons was that the business in the US was growing very fast. We had to invest in new line capacity anyway. So it is a bit more expensive to build a new site, but in fact that was an historic site that was making laundry powders that was going down. So in the end, the idea was it minimizes the risk of BCP, it saves employment because these people in this plant, they risk to lose their employment if the business goes down. We give them lines of a new business that is on the up, so we balance off employment. So it made sense on all the performance indicators, and we did it. But you really need to look at opportunities to make the right things. I mean, in 26 years in P&G, nothing is obvious. You always need to find the right way to get things done.